Yeah, no, listen, I agree with you. I think it's really interesting what's happening around the country. I think that the protests, as they, go on longer in time, we'll see more positive outcomes to the, racial injustice, to the police brutality. I mean, this is first off starting because of the murder of a black man, George Floyd, and then the anger at him, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. And they're just, kind of like the most recent news. And so I think people have had enough. They're sick of it. I think the protesters and the movement asking for dismantling, defunding some of the police around the country, I think it's an incredible and great idea. I think that there has to be other ways, that we have to have solutions. We don't know what the solutions are. I think the solutions are, perhaps training these cops to be more human, and showing them what it's like to be kind. I think, once these men and women put on these blue costumes, they forget that they're human and they become these sort of, robotic killers, and they lose their empathy with the public. And it's not everybody, but I think it goes part with the job, so to speak, or with their training. So new training, giving the money to other organizations or other, departments that need it. I think it's huge. A defunding thing doesn't mean that there's not going to be any cops. It just means that instead of maybe a cop being called in to a situation, maybe a mental health worker gets called in. Maybe someone without a taser and without a gun gets called in to sort of de-escalate the situation. And so maybe there's more money going into training and less into, gun ranges. One of the interesting statistics or sort of tidbits that I heard and sort of circulated in social media is the training that it involves to be a police. I think it's something like 900 hours of training versus maybe a barber that has like 1,300 hours or 1,400 hours, which I thought was, shocking and ludicrous. And so here you have, an organization or, a role in society, the police, that aren't trained enough to deal with the stress and, the people that they encounter. And so I don't know what's going to happen. I think that if the trend is right of, everything that we're seeing in the past few days with Minneapolis defunding the police department, with cities like New York also saying that they're going to do that, with the chokeholds, deemed illegal. And I think that that's some significant results. Now, is it just talk? Time will tell. But I think that the movement and the young people, all of us, need to continue to protest and demonstrate in order to make sure that these changes are real, that they're long term, and that they're effective. Because you know what? Maybe they're going to be effective. Maybe they're not going to be effective. So we'll see. Sure. For me, there was a few years ago in New York when there was a wave of protests around Eric Garner and Mike Brown and his murder. And that's when the Black Lives Matters movement really exploded in New York City, and there were protests in Times Square all over the city. It was incredible. At the time, I was at an ad agency, and I was pretty much locked down, chained to my desk with so much work. I really couldn't find myself contributing to the protests. And so, I was trying to find a voice, because I came up with going to all the protests, with being part of the rallies, and being out there physically, demonstrating. And so one of the things that I did for myself and to be part of the movement is I started tagging on the trains the names of people that were being murdered by the police. So Eric Garner, Mike Brown, Philando Castile, on and on, Sandra Bland. It was just hundreds of names. And so what I found it to be therapeutic, because I felt like I was contributing. I felt good that I was contributing to the struggle and to the movement for justice by shouting out their name, by writing their name. What I saw was people reacting to the names on the train. So I would write on the trains, and then I would sit on the trains and film it and watch people react to the writing. And so I found that to be a way for me personally to be involved. And so for me as an artist that wasn't able to contribute more, I felt like I was able to do a small, contribution to the struggle and to the movement at the time. And a lot of times artists, myself or many others, want to do something. We don't necessarily know what to do. We could be part of the wave of protest, but trying to find out ways to protest with art is important. So that was one small way. Or, now we have a wall across the street from the museum where we're doing the same thing. We're changing the names every day, and we're working on a mural across the street. And so artists historically have a voice. One of my favorite artists is Emory Douglas. Emory Douglas was the artist and sort of designer for the Black Panther Party in the 1960s. And so he was responsible for all the art for their newspaper. And so he was a very powerful graphic artist. And I look at him, and his art was all about racial justice. It was all about destroying the system or changing the system. And it was about educating the people and ending police brutality. And when I look back at his artwork, I was just looking at it yesterday, which was 60 years ago. We're still in the same place. We're still dealing with the same issue. Artists are still out there trying to contribute and paint and express themselves. Miami, where I'm located now, has murals popping up. There's, signs popping up. There's a mural a few blocks away that says, "I can't breathe." Actually, there's a few of them. George Floyd murals popping up. And so artists want to contribute in their own way. But now I'll go and walk over to the protest. We have one happening around the corner today. I'll see the artists at the protest, as well as I'll see them painting the messages on the walls. And, I think from an artist perspective, knowing the amount of artists that I know, artists have a particular sensitivity to the world. They feel it in a different way. They sense it in a different way. And so they get and register the pain in a different way. And in order for us to heal, we sort of have to get it out. And I think that the walls are a good place to get it out. The reason why you see all those tags on the wood covering the stores all over the country is because that's a healing thing to do, to write, "fuck the pigs," or BLM, or "we all matter," or "enough with the oppression," or whatever people are writing. It's therapeutic. You get it out and you share your opinion with the world. And really that's, for me, for the graffiti movement, that's what it's been about. It's about making your voice heard, getting out there, being part of society when really it's very easy to be lost or forgotten or not included. And so writing on the wall, all of a sudden, you write something on the wall, 500 people see it, 200 people see it, 50 people see it, you have amplified your message in a major way. And so I think that's the tradition that I work in. And I think that's a tradition that you're seeing in the streets, and it's powerful and it's important and it needs to happen. And listen, it's true, right? It is changing. And I'm very thankful that it's changing. When I was a young boy growing up in Brooklyn, it was very dangerous to be a graffiti writer. Right? You could get beat up in the streets by police. You can get killed by police, right? Michael Stewart got killed for tagging on 14th Street. He was a young man. And so I grew up in an era where it was dangerous. It was looked down upon. Definitely no parents were supporting you being a graffiti writer, going out painting. It was just unheard of. And then in general, the mood of the city was, this is a really terrible thing. And the people that are doing this are terrible people, which is wild to me because everybody that I knew that was doing it were just sort of artists and just want to express themselves. But, you fast forward 30 something years, 40 years later, and now it's gone around the world. And so we're very lucky that there have been these important documents launched into the world. So in '83, Style Wars, the film by Tony Silver and Henry Chalfant came out. Henry Chalfant and Martha Cooper put out the book Subway Art. Those two documents, the film and the book, went out and showed the world what was happening in New York City and converted thousands and thousands of kids all over the planet to get down with hip hop, to get down with graffiti. And so the difference though is when it hit those cities in '83, it was very different from when it hit New York in 1970. They got this package of music, of dance, of art, and they understood it immediately as an art form. When in New York City, we were struggling with the whole notion of vandalism and crime and art. It was very, very different and very challenging. And unfortunately, you know, in my city and growing up for me, the politicians and the police grabbed onto the illegality of it, the criminality of it, and ran with that and sort of made it a very one-sided argument. But over the time, you know, what I've seen is that cities like New York and other cities have learned from the example of places like Paris, you know, of Amsterdam, of other cities that are more forward-thinking, that understand youth culture, that have respect for their citizens and for different art forms. And as such, you know, New York now looks forward to it and be like, oh, wait a minute, like maybe we did it different, and maybe there's other ways to do it. And so it's changing. I think, you know, here in today I'm in Miami in a neighborhood called Wynwood. Wynwood is sort of a graffiti and street art district that's been sort of thriving in the manner that it is now for over 10 years. And so when you come to this neighborhood, as millions of tourists come every year, they walk around looking at the graffiti, at the murals, at the street art, at the stencils, the sidewalks, everything, and are amazed by the diversity of style of you know, the range of art. And they love it. And you see people taking pictures all day long. And when they come into the museum now, so we've been open for a few months, for 6 months, they can learn about it. And they are amazed to learn about the history of this art form going back 50 years. And they can understand it. Like, how did we get it so wrong? How did, like, we see it on the streets, this is wonderful. How could people have been criminalized? And so, you know, part of what we do, and, you know, what I explain to them is it's politically motivated, right? Young kids typically know stuff that adults don't know, but they're not listened to because they're youth. And so there's this disconnect between adults who think they know it all and youth who want to express themselves, and there's a clash. But now in hindsight, we have so much, we've come up in it, we can show it differently, and we can teach these adults a different way. And so it's powerful to see the art form being accepted, embraced, you know. And for people that are from this movement that come to a neighborhood like Wynwood, that come to the Museum of Graffiti here, they're very moved because our whole lives we've been looked at as criminals and derelicts and scourges on society. But when you come in here, we're celebrating this movement. We're celebrating, and we're like, no, you know, actually they had it wrong. You were artists all along. We know that. And so it's a wonderful thing to be able to flip the switch on it. But then it's not the case everywhere. You go to Pittsburgh and you get caught tagging in Pittsburgh, you're in serious, you know, trouble. You know, there's some cities that are very much intolerant of it. And so that's another thing that I remind people is it might be sweet in some places, but it's not sweet everywhere. And so we have to remind folks that just like there's a struggle for racial justice going on, there's still a struggle for artists around the world in certain places to be able to express themselves publicly, because it's not really accepted everywhere yet.